The domain keys identified mail DKIM is a specification for cryptographically signing email messages, permitting a signing domain to claim responsibility for a message in the mail stream. So message recipients can verify the signature by querying the signer's domain directly to retrieve the appropriate public key, and thereby he can confirm that the message was attested to by a party in possession of the private key for signing domain. Now this DKIM, this is proposed internet standard of the RFC 4871, and it has been widely adopted by a range of email providers including the corporations, the government agencies, Gmail, Yahoo, and many internet service providers. So let us look into the internet mail architecture. So to understand the operation of the DKIM, it is very useful to have a basic grasp of the internet mail architecture. So this internet mail architecture is currently defined by the RFC 5598, and at the fundamental level, this architecture consists of a user world in the form of message user agents, which is referred to as MUA, and the transfer world in the form of message handling service, MHS, which is composed of the message transfer agents, MTA. So this MHS basically will accept a message from one user and deliver it to one or more other users, creating a virtual MUA, that is message user agents to message user agents exchange environment. So this architecture involves three types of interoperability. That is, one is directly between the users, from one user and it delivers it to another or many other users, creating a virtual MUA to MUA exchange environment. So this messages must be formatted by the MUA on behalf of the message author so that the message can be displayed to the message recipient by the destination MUA. There is also an interoperability requirement between MUA to MHS, and later when it is delivered from MHS to a destination MUA. The third type of interoperability is required among the MTA components, that is along the transfer path through the MHS. So mainly, if you see, the internet mail architecture consists of MUA, MHS, MTA, and the interoperability needs to be provided between the users, between MUA and MHS, among the MTA components. So let us look into the key components of internet mail architecture. So the key components of the internet mail architecture includes the message user agent, that is MUA, then the mail submission agent, MSA, message transfer agent, MTA, mail delivery agent, MDA, and message store, MS. So let us look into the functional modules and the standardized protocols for the internet, and also let us explain those key components. So the first key component that, as I specified, was the message user agent MUA. So you can see here At the transmission side, you have MUA. So this MUA operates on behalf of the user and its user applications. So it is their representative within the email service. So typically this function is housed in the user's computer and is referred to as the client email program or a local network email server. So the author MUA formats a message and performs the initial submission into the MHS via the MSA. So the recipient MUA processes the received mail for storage or for display to the recipient user. The second key component that we have is the mail submission agent, referred to as the MSA. So the MSA accepts the message submitted by a MUA and enforces the policies of the hosting domain and the requirements of the internet standards. So this function may be located together with the MUA or as a separate function model. Then we have the SMTP, which is used between the MUA and the MSA. You can see here we have the simple mail transfer protocol, which is used between MUA and MSA. The next key component that we have is the message transfer agent, which is in short referred to as the MTA. So this MTA basically relays mail from one application level hop, and it is like a packet switch or an IP router, and its job is to make the routing assessments and move the message closer to the recipients. So relaying is performed by a sequence of MTA. So that is why you can see here there are various connections that are being shown, and in between you have SMTPs. So you have a sequence of MTAs until the message reaches the destination MDA. Okay, and an MTA also adds a trace information to the message header, and SMTP is used in between the MTAs and between an MTA and an MSA or a MDA. So next that we have is the MDA, that corresponds to mail delivery agent, which is responsible for transferring the message from MHS to the MS. So the MS, that is message storage, in this an MUA can employ a long-term MS, and an MS can be located on a remote server or on the same machine as that of the MUA. So typically an MUA will retrieve the messages from a remote server using the post office protocol or an IMAP, Internet Message Access Protocol. So here you can see MUA basically tries to retrieve the messages from IMAP or POP. So this is regarding the fundamental key components that will be used in the internet mail architecture. So you can see that when we specified the key components, we did specify regarding the MUA, MSA, MTA, MDA and MS, and we also specified regarding the message handling service, which is MHS. So all of these are being shown in this particular block diagram of the internet mail architecture, and how this MUA is provided both at the sender and the receiver side. Next, before we proceed, we have the two important concepts, that is ADMD, which stands for the Administrative Management Domain, and the DNS, which stands for Domain Name System. So first we'll look into the ADMD, that is Administrative Management Domain. which is an internet email provider. And as an example, I can say this includes a department that operates a local mail relay, that is MTA, an IT department that operates an enterprise mail relay, and an ISP that operates a public shared email service. So basically in this, each ADMD can have different operating policies and trust-based decision making. For example, you have a distinction between the mail that is exchanged within an organization and a mail that is exchanged between independent organizations. So rules for handling the two types of traffics tend to be quite different. So mainly an important concept to be remembered here is that this ADMD basically is an internet email provider. Then we have the second concept, that is the domain name system, which is a directory lookup service that provides a mapping between the name of the host on the internet and its numerical address. Now let us look into the various email threads addressed by DKIM. So when we talk about email threads, we are mainly referring to the RFC 4686, which describes the threats being addressed by the DKIM in terms of characteristics, capabilities, and the location of the potential attackers. So first we'll look into the characteristics. So RFC 4686 characterizes a range of attackers on a spectrum of 3 levels of threat. The first one, at the lower end, are the attackers who simply want to send an email that a recipient does not want to receive. So the attacker can use one of the number of commercially available tools that allow the sender to falsify the origin address of the messages. So what happens is, this makes it difficult for the receiver to filter spam on the basis of the originating address or the domain. In the next level are the professional senders of the bulk spam mail. So these attackers often operate as commercial enterprises and send messages on behalf of the third parties. So they employ more comprehensive tools for the attack, including the mail transfer agents, those are MTAs, and registered domains and networks of compromised computers, that is zombies, to send messages and to harvest the address to which they need to send. The third one is the most sophisticated and financially motivated senders of messages who stand to receive substantial financial benefit, such as from an email based fraud scheme, and these attackers can be expected to employ all the above, that is either send an email to the one who does not want to receive or send a bulk spam mail. So they can use the above mechanisms, the first two mechanisms that we just discussed, and may also attack the internet infrastructure itself, including the DNS. Basically these will be referred to as cache poisoning attacks and IP routing attacks. Then we have the various capabilities that an attacker might have. So as specified by RFC 4086, the first capability would be to submit messages to MTA and message submission agents, MSA, at multiple locations in the internet. The second capability would be to construct an arbitrary message header fields, including those claiming to be mailing list, resenders, and other mail agents. The third one could be signing messages on behalf of domains under their control. Fourth one, generate substantial numbers of either unsigned or apparently signed messages that might be used to attempt a denial of service attack. Fifth one is resending messages that may be previously signed by the domain. So in addition to this, we have also other capabilities. The sixth one, that is wherein it's possible to transmit messages using any envelope information that is desired, or you can act as an authorized submitter for the messages from a compromised computer, or manipulate of IP routing. That is, you can use this to submit messages from a specific IP address or difficult to trace addresses, or cause a diversion of messages to a specific domain. The ninth capability is limited influence over portions of the DNS using mechanisms such as cache poisoning, and this might be used to influence messages routing or to falsify advertisements of the DNS based keys or signing practices. The 10th one is access to significant computing resources, for example through the worm infected zombie computers, which will allow the bad actor to perform various types of brute force attacks. The 11th one is ability to eavesdrop on the existing traffic, perhaps say from a wireless network. So these are the various capabilities that an attacker might have, and most of these attacks, if you can recall, we have looked into them in terms of when we saw various types of cyber attacks in the beginning. So it's just that the names could be, or the terminologies could be different, but most of this are already looked into. Now, the third one that we have is the threat based on location. So here usually in DKIM the focus is primarily on the attackers located outside of the administrative units of the claimed originator and the recipient. So these administrative units frequently correspond to the protected portions of the network adjacent to the originator and the recipient. So it will be in this area that the trust relationships required for the authenticated message submission will not exist. So within these administrative units, there will be other types of mechanisms such as authenticated message submission that will be easier to deploy and more likely to be used than the DKIM. So these external bad actors will usually try to attempt to exploit any nature of email that motivates most recipient MTAs to accept the messages from anywhere for the delivery to their local domain. So they might generate messages without the signatures, or with incorrect signatures, or with correct signatures from domains with little traceability, and they may also pose as mailing list or greeting cards or other agents that may legitimately send or resend messages on behalf of others. So we can have the types of attacks based on location as well. So let us look into the DKIM strategy, that is domain keys identified mail strategy. So if you see this DKIM, it is designed to provide an email authentication technique that is transparent to the end user. Basically, a user's email message is signed by a private key of the administrative domain from which the email originates. The signature covers all the contents of the message and some of the RFC 5322 message headers. So at the receiving end, the MDA can access the corresponding public key via a DNS and verify the signature. thus authenticating that message comes from a claimed administrative domain. So the mail that originates from somewhere else but claims to come from a given domain will not pass the authentication test and can be rejected. So this approach differs from that of the SMIME and the PGP, which uses the originator's private key to sign the content of the message. So let us look into the motivation for DKIM. There are around 5 motivations which are based on which we go for the use of DKIM. Firstly, SMIME depends on both the sending and the receiving users employing SMIME. So for almost all users, the bulk of the incoming mail does not use SMIME, and the bulk of the mail the users wants to send is to the recipients who do not use SMIME. So this is one motivation. Second motivation is that SMIME signs only the message content. So RFC 5322 header information concerning the origin can be compromised. Thirdly, DKIM is not implemented in client programs, that is MUAs, and is therefore transferring to the user, and the user just needs to take no action. Basically, no action is required from the user side. The fourth motivation is that the DKIM applies to all mail from cooperating domains. And the fifth one is that DKIM allows good senders to prove that they did send a particular message and prevent any attackers from manipulating or doing any corrections to their mails or the messages that they have sent. The next one that we have is the operation of the DKIM. So this is basically a detailed explanation to show the operation of the DKIM. So here we begin with the message generated by the user, and it will be transported or transmitted into the MHS to an MSA that is within the user's administrative domain. So an email message is generated by an email client program. The content of the message plus the selected RFC 5322 headers is signed by the email provider using the provider's private key. The signer will be associated with the domain, which could be a corporate local network, ISP, or a public key email facility such as a Gmail. The signed message is then passed through the internet via sequence of MTAs that we have seen previously in the previous diagram. So at the destination, the MDA retrieves the public key for the incoming signature, and it will verify the signature before passing the message onto the destination email client. So the default algorithm that will be used in this case, that is the signing algorithm, is RSA with SHA 256, but we can also use the RSA with SHA 1. So if you look at this particular operation and the diagram that is shown here, it is equivalent to the diagram that is there here, which has the various key components, but here they are explaining the entire operation of the DKIM, but they have not specified exactly where you have the various connection between the MTAs, all those things you can see, but they have not specified exactly where we are going to do the connection. That is, they have not specified you the MHS and all that, but this is a more overview of how the signature is going to be verified, what type of algorithm will be used. So next we have the DKIM functional flow. So here in this particular figure you can look into the various elements of the DKIM operation. So the basic message processing in this case is divided between the signing administrative management domain ADMD and a verifying ADMD. So this is between the originating ADMD and the delivering ADMD, but it can involve other ADMDs in the handling path. So signing is performed by the authorized module within the signing ADMD, and it will use the private information from a key store. So within the originating ADMD, this might be performed by the MUA, MSA or an MTA. So verifying is performed, as I said, by an authorized module, and the module will verify the signature or determine whether a particular signature was required. So verifying the signature uses public information from the key store, and if the signature passes, the reputation information is used to assess the signer. If it passes, it is used to assess the signer, and that information is passed to the message filtering system. If the you can see it passes through the message filtering system. If the signature fails or there is no signature using the author's domain, information about the signing practices related to the author can be retrieved remotely or locally, and that information is passed to the message filtering system. For example, if the sender's Gmail uses DKIM but no DKIM signature is present, then the message may be considered as a fraud. So the signature is inserted into the RFC 5322 message as an additional header entry starting with the keyword DKIM signature. So let us look into an example of a 5322 message with the header keyword DKIM signature. So before a message is signed, a process known as canonicalization is performed on both the header and the body of the RFC 5322 message. So this canonicalization is necessary in order to deal with the possibility of any minor changes in the message that could be made, including the character encoding, the treatment of trailing white space in the message lines, and the folding and the unfolding of the header lines. So the intent of the canonicalization is to make a minimal transformation of the message, say for the purpose of signing, that will give its best chance of producing the same canonical value at the receiving end. So DKIM defines two header canonicalization algorithms called as the simple and the relaxed. So the simple algorithm tolerates almost no modification, while the relaxed will tolerate some sort of modifications. And the signature will include a number of fields, and each field begins with a tag code followed by an equal sign and ends with a semicolon. As you can see here, one example. So this is one field which begins with a tag consisting of a tag code followed by an equal sign and ends with a semicolon. Similarly, you have here a tag followed by equal sign ends with a semicolon. So there are various fields in this message. So let me briefly tell you what all is present in the DKIM signature message. So we have V, which corresponds to the DKIM version, A, which corresponds to the algorithm used to generate the signature. It must be either the RSA combined with SHA 1 or RSA combined with SHA 256. C basically corresponds to the canonicalization method used on the header and the body. Then you have D, which corresponds to a domain name used as an identifier to refer to the identifier of a responsible person or an organization. So in DKIM, this identifier is called as the signing domain identifier, in short SDID. And as an example, this field indicates that the sender is using a Gmail address. As you can see, that is why you have D is equal to gmail.com. So this means that it's using a Gmail address. Then you have S. So this is basically a DKIM selector, which is used by the verifier to retrieve the proper key during the signature verification. That is because selector is used because there are different keys which can be used at different circumstances for the same signing domain. So it is essential to specify the selector. So here selector S is equal to gamma. Then we have H, which is the signed header field, and this signed header field is separated, is basically a colon separated list of header field names that identify the header fields presented to the signing algorithm. So here in this example, we have the domain key signature field that is being used. You can see here it's MIME version, received date, message ID, subject. Then you have from to content type, content transfer, encoding. So basically this means that this is a domain key signature field. Then we have BH, which corresponds to the hash of the canonicalized body part of the message. So this provides the additional information for diagnosing the signature verification values. Finally, in the message you also have a field which corresponds to B, and this is the signature data in the base 64 format, that is the encrypted hash code.